Hello, good afternoon. No, that's not on.
No, that's just for.
All right, okay, Grant. You can all hear me anyway. Grant, you're very welcome. We're delighted to see such a large crowd here. We weren't really sure would there be such a great interest in crows and ravens and all of that. So we're delighted to see people are as interested in them as we are. It's our first event of Science Week in the Midlands today, so it's great to start off with such a good crowd. And Ricky Whelan, who's from County Laois and is an ornithologist for Birdwatch Ireland, is going to take us through the curious title of The Secret Life of Crows. So hopefully we're all going to learn something new. And then Raven Havens have joined us. We're going to have a chance to have a look at some ravens. And then we're going to take a walk up to the Downs Rookery, where we'll see the crows fly in at sunset, and maybe have a look as well at the great interpretive panel that Ricky has recently completed. So can I just ask that people do put their mobile phones on silent, but because it's Science Week, if people are on Twitter or Facebook, we do encourage you to take photographs and share them and tweet them. So yeah, you're good to go, are you? And also, if anyone has come along with young children, we just have a consent form that you need to sign in terms of we are photographing and videoing this event. So if somebody has young children and hasn't yet signed that form, I'm going to pass it round, and if you can make sure to do that. Yeah. So can I just pass that round and then so without further ado, I'll hand you over to Ricky Whelan. Thanks very much.
Thanks. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks Jackie and everyone at the Midlands Science Festival for inviting me, and Portlaoise Library as well for facilitating the talk. And it's great to see so many people interested in wildlife and birds and certainly crows. I'm delighted to be here, but there's sort of one man to blame for me being here and this whole event starting, and that man's in the crowd. His name's Niall Kavanagh. And 2 years ago he asked me did I know anything about the Downs Rookery, which is a stone's throw from here across there, and it's the local rookery and it's the local roost. And Niall grew up playing there, and he wondered did anyone actually ever sort of do any significant study or count of and see how many birds were there. And I was a bit embarrassed because I didn't know, having passed it 100 times, I never sort of threw an eye on it. And I was like one of those people, sort of a bit sort of nonchalant about the familiar. I just didn't care there were crows. They weren't a very interesting bird species as far as I was sort of concerned about other things that I found more interesting. So I started looking into them a bit more. And when I started to research this talk, I thought I knew a lot about crows, and it turned out I knew nothing at all. And when I started to read more, it just turned out that there was just so much to learn. It was almost impossible. It's been a bit of a journey, but I've tried to summarise everything, and I hope it's enjoyable for you. It's supposed to be about an hour to talk, but I don't know. But what we'll do is afterwards, we'll meet the raven and a jackdaw, hopefully, which is good, so you get an idea of their scale and their intelligence in the flesh. And then we'll go across the road to see the interpretive panel and sort of do an unofficial unveiling there, and hopefully see the crows forming at the roost. And it's probably one of the best, if not the best, urban wildlife spectacles I know of. So it'd be really good if it all works out. But with nature, you never know. So we'll see, fingers crossed, say a prayer. So the crow family, a bit of context. The crow family has 120 species worldwide. That's sometimes contested by scientists, so it goes up and down, fluctuates by 1 or 2 species, depending on what the current thoughts are. They go as the Corvidates, the Latin is just the way they've classified them. In that, there's 40 species in the genus Corvus, which are the true crows, the black guys you know about that are all over the world. Within those then, they're closely related to the magpies, the jays, and the nutcrackers. So they belong in Corvidae, and the Corvus then are a subgroup of that. So we have magpies, you're all familiar with them. Pika pika is our common magpie that you see in the gardens. We have the Eurasian jay, which is sort of a woodland bird, an acorn sort of eating specialist. And I'll talk a bit more about him in a minute. And then we've no nutcrackers in this country or in Britain, so you have to go to continental Europe before you come across the spotted nutcracker. So the crow family, they're largest of the passerines. The passerines are the perching songbirds. Now, it wouldn't be the first bird you think of if you think about a songbird as a crow, because they're quite raucous and a little bit they sound terrible, to be honest. They're not singers. So it's not sort of one we think of, but they're certainly perching birds. And scientists tend to group animals and things because that's what they feel comfortable doing. They're scientists, they just do. So it belongs more to the passerines than any other group. So they're not birds of prey, they're not owls, they're not waders, they're not sort of, whatever it might be, they're not herons. So they belong a bit more to the passerines. There's 40 species, like I said, all over the world. So this guy here is the biggest of the crows, biggest of the passerines. That's the tick-billed raven, and it's endemic to Ethiopia and in hilly country there. It exists there. It's sort of spread a little bit west into sort of Central Africa now, but mostly its origins are Ethiopia. This guy here is a true, it's from New Guinea, it's the true grey crow. We sometimes call hooded crows grey crows, but this guy's real name is the grey crow. That's a juvenile. The juveniles are much greyer than the parents, and they darken up over the years as they molt and everything else. And this guy here is called the Streseman's bush crow. Again, he's from Ethiopia. It's the size of a starling. It's very like a starling, but its DNA suggests it's closer to the corvids, to the crows. It doesn't really belong anywhere else. It's probably a living relic of a load of different species that subsequently went and divided from there and became the crows and became the starlings and everything else. But he's closer to the crows than anything else. So the crow family, there's similarities that have banged them into this group. They're physically similar, dark plumage, handsome, sort of tall birds. They're gregarious, which is a fancy word for they're social. They go around in groups, in flocks, in families. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And any star you see or asterisk is because there's exceptions to every rule, and I'll talk a bit as I go through the species. They're monogamous, so they pair for life. And there's exceptions to that rule as well, so some of them like to go elsewhere. But they're single brooded always, and that's down to their sociality as well. They lay one clutch of eggs unless they fail for some reason early in the season, they might lay another. But generally, if they go to rear the young, they'll only have one, and they stay in family groups well into sort of the autumn and early winter before they go into flocks. So that's such an investment of time and energy and everything else that they just don't have time to go for a second brood. They choose their mate, so you think every animal chooses their mate, they don't. Male deer, for instance, round up a load of females, do the business and walk away, forget about it, and the females have to rear the young. Crows are different, they stay in families, the male will feed the female on the nest, and he'll feed the youngsters then, and they'll go from there. They're very adaptable, that's why we find them everywhere in the world. They're ubiquitous, which means they're everywhere, they have global distribution. And I'll show you a map in a minute to show you where they're from and where they've gotten to. And they're highly intelligent, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Let you take that in for a minute, I catch a breath. So they can eat everything, absolutely everything. They're scavengers, they'll eat dead stuff. Be it roadkill or whatever, they'll eat fruit, they'll eat grain, they'll eat all sorts. There's one thing no bird can eat is an avocado, and that's a weird fact, but it's true. There's a molecule in it called persin. I don't know much about it, but I know it's absolutely toxic to birds. So don't go feeding avocados on your bird feeders anytime soon, please. If there's anyone sort of here planning to kill a lot of birds, maybe that's the way to go about it, I don't know. But most birds would probably detect it before they eat it anyway. Scavenging equates to a very small part of their diet. So we often see in popular culture and stuff, you see ravens and other crows tearing sort of body parts and stuff, animals apart. It does happen, certainly. Probably makes for a better photo than eating some nuts on the ground, So that's why we see that a lot more. There's only a few places in the world there's no native crows. So that's New Zealand, the southern half of South America, the Antarctic and the Arctic. And don't know why, just the landscape didn't suit them, it was too cold, probably to do with the ice ages and everything else. There's crows there in all those places now. They go as far as 21,000 feet on Everest and well up into 80 degrees north, well into Arctic Canada and Siberia. So they're way up there. And that's mostly our northern raven that have got to both ends. They just have serious tolerance. They're a big bird. And like I said, they're the largest of the songbirds. And the largest songbird in the world is the tick-billed raven in Ethiopia. So, public perception. Well, setting the scene. So, there's a lot of negative perception around crows. I'm surprised that maybe you're all enemies of the crow. I don't know. You're trying to find out how to kill them. But hopefully you're in the positive realm. But so, from the start, superstition. So, they're colouring. They're black, they're dark, they're devilish. They're all those associations that have just been long before we ever existed. They're sort of in the human psyche. They eat carrion and they're observed on carcasses quite often. And back in the day, and still to this day, they eat humans. I mean, we're lucky enough we don't leave humans lying around the place. But certainly where there's war-torn countries, famine, that sort of thing, you will still see ravens on human bodies. And certainly on battlefields, you see in a lot of films, they'll be eaten. And that's all true, if you like. There's a heavy association with witchcraft. I've got some pictures to go with these. So there's your witch. In my research, I came across one love spell for men only. If you fancy a woman, all you need is a raven heart to get you started. You make it into a paste. Raven Haven might be able to help you out there. Now, you have to rub it in certain places, and you have to say your love's name a few times. And there's some other ones, there's some other concoctions as well, but we won't go into it. But certainly they're associated with witchcraft. They travel in raucous gangs, and have a sinister portrayal, and there's the whole murder of crows, which is the collective noun, which doesn't do them any favours really. And of course, now it was before my time, but The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock did no one any favours. And I think that still sort of resides in society, that people still kind of think they're in an episode of The Crows when they see them. They're loud and raucous, so they do torment people. I mean, they are annoying. If they're behind your house in a big roost, you'd probably have not a whole pile good to say about them. Seen as bullies on the bird table and everywhere else, so they're large, successful birds. Nobody likes anything that's successful, whether it's Donald Trump or if it's crows. We just don't get on with things that are successful. You're jealous, or you just think they're, and you're trying to stand up for the little guy or whatever. If you're going to create a food source, they're going to come. That's like any animal. It's one of their needs. They have an energy cost. They have to fill it. There's ways around it. Ask me afterwards if you want to get rid of crows off your bird feeders. Yeah, a few avocados. So, like I said, they're ubiquitous. So we find them in all sort of faunal realms, which is just the different areas where certain groups of species tend to linger around. All latitudes, all continents, they're everywhere. They're considered an agricultural pest, familiar picture from the countryside, and everything else. And that's down to them eating grain and stuff, cereals, and coming en masse like a plague, I suppose. So there is some sort of, there's definitely something to go on there with the farmers, to be fair. Positive. Everyone seems to know crows are intelligent. And I don't know if that's from watching David Attenborough documentaries or observations they make from their own bird feeder or whatever. But everyone seems to sort of vaguely know that crows are intelligent. They're interesting and they're accessible, so they're everywhere. So you can see them in your garden, you can see them down the football pitch, you can see them everywhere. So people have a little connection with them whether they don't know it or not. They are there, very obvious birds. The likes of Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, the Vikings, all that sort of stuff has brought them into sort of modern culture and popular culture, and sort of, I suppose, has given them a bit more of a positive steer in recent years. And are they farmers' friends? Well, I would argue they are. That there is a daddy longlegs you'll all be familiar with, and their larvae are leather jackets, which anyone that's sort of kept any sort of grassland at all would be familiar with. Crows are the #1 predator on leather jackets. In New Zealand, a number of years ago, it's a long time ago now, they tried to get rid of all the non-native species because they're, interfering with the native species and stuff. And one of those things was rooks. They tried to get rid of, and they did successfully on the South Island, until the farmers lobbied so hard to get them back because they had terrible bad years with crops because the leather jackets were affecting them so badly. So that's just one example. Now, they still don't belong there. I don't know how that habitat evolved to not have rooks, and the leather jackets, maybe they're introduced as well, I'm not sure. But we do need them. They eat an awful lot of bugs and sort of harmful things like that. So a few collective nouns, just get you thinking. Murder of crows, doesn't do them any favours. A congress of crows, kind of makes them feel regal, intelligent. Hover of crows, don't understand that one. Parliament of crows, probably to do with them sort of going around in big groups in roosts, chatting away with each other and sorting things out. And an unkindness of ravens, again, does them no favours at all, makes them sound very sinister. So in Ireland, we've 7 corvidae species. So not just the crows, the other ones, the jays and the magpies as well. Now I know all the birdwatchers in the crowd, so can anyone name the 7 that aren't of those birdwatchers? Guesses? Shout out a few. Raven, certainly, yeah. Rook, yeah. Magpie, yeah. Jay, yeah. Jackdaw. Which? Carrion crow. Yeah, the hooded crow, carrion crow, yeah. We miss them all, are we? Blackbird's not one. Blackbird's a thrush, actually.
Jackdaw and chough.
Chough, good stuff. So we're not familiar with chough in Ireland because they're a coastal bird in Ireland. And I'll explain a bit more about them as well. That's Delhi. So the jay. Garrulus glandarius. So screech old quilla, the screamer of the wood. And if anyone's ever come across a jay, they'll know why they're called that. They've the most sinister deathly call ever. It's like something being murdered with a blunt instrument. It's quite severe, raucous distress call. They breed on their own in woods. They're loosely sociable in the winter, so they will go around in bigger groups. The male and female are monogamous, and they will loosely associate with each other in the winter, but they don't have to stick together. They're not like jackdaws or rooks. They're probably most famous for planting all. They're given the sort of, I suppose, the credit for planting all the native oak woodlands in Europe and North America. Because they cache food, so they get the acorns that have fallen from the tree in the autumn, and then they go and cache them. They stick them into the ground, and more often than not forget about them, and then they sprout. So they have a huge range as well. So they go all the way to the forests of Thailand, right up into sort of the woods in Wicklow. So they're really sort of doing well. Within that species, there's a number of races. They're the same species, but they look a bit different, have slightly different ranges, whatever, slightly different ecology, but they are the same species. So we find them all the way over in Thailand. Something here in my notes in front of me. They can stash up to 3,000 acorns in a month. So that's good outgoing. And this is the best, well, actually, about a month ago is probably the best time to see them, when the acorns are out and they're commuting over and back to where they're caching them between the woods that they're getting them. So they're quite sort of, they're a woodland bird of the canopy. You don't often see them. You hear them, yeah, but you don't see them that much. So the magpie, Pika Pika, the snagbrack, I think is one of the most beautiful birds we have. That azure blue, they're quite, they're clever. I don't know, it's one of those things. They're just, but we hate them. It's ingrained in us since we're kids. We just can't get our heads around them at all. They're really smart. They are like crows, they're gregarious. They nest quite close together in loose, complex colonies. So within a sort of square mile, there could be 20 nests in different people's gardens or different sort of parks or whatever. So they're not sort of, they're not strongly communal in a big nucleus of nests, but they will know where each other's are, but they're not strongly territorial, so they'll accept others. They've one brood, like all the corvids, 4 to 6 eggs, and in some instances 10. So in good years they can rear 10, so there can be a lot of magpies. And in the autumn they will go around in family groups, which is kind of nice as well. And it shows an intelligence well that they look out for their own, and sort of where most birds, once the chicks fledge, are gone and they're on their own. And they nest in trees, you've seen them. So we're all familiar with a nursery rhyme that's basically paralysed us as a culture. If you see one for sorry, you have to wave at, or you're going to get all this bad luck. You're probably going to lose your job, crash your car, something like that. But it's terrible. I still do it. I don't know why, but I do. But this is 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for secret, never to be told, 8 for a wish, 9 for a kiss, 10 for a bird you must not miss. Now, I don't ever remember using 8, 9 or 10, so you don't really ever see them in groups bigger than that, and it's probably because we see them mostly in family groups in the autumn. And I came across another one. It's kind of I would say a less PC version of it as well. So, but it seems to be old. Like the language they used is strange. But there is other versions of that rhyme. And I'm going to dispel the biggest myth of all. Magpies do not take your glasses. They do not like shiny things. There's loads and loads of science to suggest that they're actually kind of afraid of shiny things. So nobody knows why, but that has always just been a common sort of myth about magpies. It's very strange. Pardon?
I've been watching that they do take.
What did they take?
A necklace, actually.
It's mad, isn't it?
It is.
But
It was a mad magpie, I think.
there you go. Well, I'm wrong. But it's crazy. There has been studies and they show what their preference is, and they always take the sort of dull things for their nests. Now their nests are made out of just hair, twigs, roots and stuff. So I've never come across a nest. They have the big round nest with an entrance hole and an exit hole for if they have to escape. Some people think they're squirrel drays or whatever, but they're magpie nests. Another thing people hold them sort of responsible for is that they eat small chicks and birds and all stuff from nests, our songbirds, which they do. But there's been studies in the UK on a number of occasions to suggest where there's good communities of magpies, the songbirds do equally as well where there's no magpies, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense? So they're just a natural predator, and songbirds have evolved to get around that too. There's our jackdaw. Everyone's familiar with the jackdaw. It's the smallest of the sort of true crows. They live in loose colonies, sort of in chimney pots. You see a lot of them. Emo court has a load in all the chimneys. Sometimes in trees and stuff, but mostly in buildings, holes in trees and stuff, and in loose colonies. The odd time you get them on their own and stuff. We know them. They're small, shiny, sort of short black bill, big blue eye, quite a handsome little bird, and they sort of strut around very proud. Clever little things. And they love taking over sort of nest box of bigger birds, starlings and owls and other things, so they can be a bit of annoyance there. And they will go to your bird feeders as well. This is the chough. This is the one you might not be familiar with from the coast. So in other regions where they have a huge distribution as well globally, but their Latin name is Pyrrhocorax, which is the sort of, it's the fire crow because of their legs and their bill is fiery red. They make this really weird electronic crow call. It's bizarre. If you're ever on the coast and you can't explain what you're after hearing, it's probably a chough. It's really, really weird. You can Google it when you get home. You'll see in their distribution map, it's all coastal in Britain and Ireland and on islands. Elsewhere in the world, they're a bird of the mountains. Sort of coastal, rocky outcrops. Just sort of exposed mountain, miserable sort of places. I don't know, they seem to survive there. But in Ireland, they do well on sort of forgotten coastlines, coastal grasslands and stuff. The pair will defend a small territory, but they're still quite social. They'll loosely associate with the non-breeders in groups during the day and forage in the fields. They have got hierarchies in their sort of social structure. They don't mature to breed until around 3. Now there's exceptions to that, but the 3-year-olds at the roost show the most aggression because they're sort of exerting their dominance. They're looking for misses, whatever they're doing. And the first-year birds, the offspring of this year, will be the least dominant. They'll be on the outside. So the 3-year-old birds will get right into the warm part of the roost, and they'll roost on cliffs and in old ruins on the coast and stuff. So rook is this guy here. That's to scale. You'll be familiar with them. People think they're really ugly because they've got that bare face patch beside the bill. And the reason that is they do a thing called zircon feeding. It's when they probe the earth, then when their bill is in the earth, they open and then they take it out. And then they can observe if there's any invertebrates in there or whatever. So that basically, that fleshy patch is an extension of their bill, so they can stick it right in there, see if there's any worms, any leather jackets or whatever. They do that. They're hugely social. They'll defend a territory of about 3 inches around their nest. They don't care once you're not interfering with the nest. There'll be another nest a metre away. The male will roost beside the nest, the female will brood the eggs. He'll feed her in the nest. And when she's done incubating the eggs and they're hatched out, they'll both feed them. So they're cool dudes. Hopefully we'll see a load today. They're good parents. And the roost, I'll explain a lot more about roosts in a while, but they're really sort of good family birds. Now the typical lifespan is 6 years, but they can live, the longest ringed bird was ever recovered was 16 years and 8 months old, so that'd be rare, but in captivity they probably live to about 20 years. Now the hooded crow, the Corvus cornix, you'll see their distribution, quite a westerly distribution. The rest of this bare patch in the UK and southern Scotland and Wales is, that's the home range of the other carrion crow. Same species, but they look different. So our hooded crows have that whole grey sort of like what would you call it, kind of waistcoat going on. They're big old bullies, as sort of people would see. They're predators. They're close thing to ravens, I suppose. They do really well. They're quite adaptable. They'll nest anywhere, and they're just good at what they do, really. But they're a big bird. But the carrion crow, I don't know if I have a photo of carrion crow. I might have one coming up. But they're the same species. But British ornithologists or bird watchers will get very excited to see one of those, just because they're different than the ones they get at home. So the raven, the king of the birds, the king of the crows, huge colossal bird. Fiach dove, the black hunter, average weight up to 150, 1,560 grams. They're big birds, they're heavy. About the average weight of a human brain, an adult's brain, which is a bit strange, but they are. Westerly range as well. This gap in the UK is down to them being persecuted in the 1900s. Gamekeepers, stuff like that, sheep farmers and everything else. And they've still not sort of got pushed away back in there yet. They've probably got a lot of competition there from the other crow species as well, including the carrion crows. So they haven't quite moved in there yet. In Ireland, it's still quite patchy. Sort of bogs, they're birds of the bogs in the mountains here. You do get them in the wider countryside, but that niche seems to be occupied more by rooks and the jackdaws. So 10 facts about them, and I'll flesh them all out a bit. Considered one of the smartest animals, and there's a book by a guy from the US called Brent Heinrich. He's been studying ravens for years and years. A couple of experiments he did. The first one he ever did was he dropped a piece of food tied to a string down a tube that the raven couldn't access. Within 30 seconds, the raven had figured out he could pull up the string to get the food. Now, that's not kind of like, okay, you're going... But still, it's the first time. It's a novel problem for the bird. They'd never seen it before. They can communicate quite well to each other. They actually use their bills to point to things. So they go, don't mind your man over there, or there's food over there, or whatever. They can mimic lots of sounds to the point where they can scare. They can even mimic wolves to scare prey, to go, geez, I better leg it. So they can come out of where it's hiding, and they'll pounce on it. Heinrich did another one to see if they truly did communicate stuff that they hadn't experienced, or hadn't shown the other birds. So he brought a captive bird. He went to a roost, caught a bird that was in a roost of maybe 1,000 other ravens or whatever, 500 ravens, took it back to a cage in his house, put a dead moose out in the countryside, covered it in snow, and the next morning brought this raven to this food source. Showed it to raven. He's like, deadly. Flew back. The next morning, 500 ravens were there. Wow. He had shown them, and they couldn't have found it themselves because it was covered in snow. So they're really quite smart. They can imitate human speech. I just told you that. You might see that later on. I don't know. They're featured in many myths. I'll talk a lot more about that in a second, but they have always existed in myth and legend. That's probably down to them eating bodies and stuff, and they've got associated with otherworldly stuff. They demonstrate rapid repairing, and by rapid you could not sort of, I suppose, a female can be lost on the nest during incubation, and by that afternoon the male will have recruited a new female. So it's quite strange, whatever way that works. But it can. Same with female and male, because she has to get serviced by the male on the nest. He's to feed her. She will find one within, and they keep big territories when they're on eggs. So there shouldn't be any birds within their range. So how they do it, I don't know. They're very playful. Hundreds and hundreds of videos of crows or ravens messing in the snow if you Google it. They're gas, and that would suggest that most animals struggle to stay alive. But if they've got time on their hands to play, it shows that they're really sort of at the top of their game. Ravens do weird things with ants. Now, all the corvids do. It's strange. They'll bathe themselves on ant hills to get the ants really angry that they cover their fur. They'll start to squish them on their feathers, and it looks like they're in a state of rapture. They don't fully understand it. They don't know if it's an anti-fungicide with the chemicals in the ants, or if they're sort of getting high on it, or whatever. Still, they don't understand it, but they do it. Whoops. They're highly adaptable, so we find them all over the world for that reason. They show empathy to other ravens, so they'll have a fight for dominance, and afterwards the sort of guy who won the fight will sort of go over to the other lad and go, listen, it's not the end of the world, maybe next time. and they also recognise they're familiar with birds. The birds they like, they will show sort of friendly behaviours towards. The ones that don't, they'll get quite raucous and angry towards them. So they certainly have feelings. They go around in teenage gangs, that's true. They don't breed till they're 3 or 4, maybe even 5. And in that, the rest of the time, they're in loose, non-breeding groups. And those groups is sort of when you're sizing up your potential pair or partner. And they rove around those teenage groups until they reach maturity, and then whatever chemical or thing happens in their brain, they decide, okay, pick your missus, pick your husband, and off you go and find a territory. What to do? Oh yeah, the way about the same as the brain, I told you that. They live in a nest known as an eyrie. Now all eagles nest, birds of prey, and ravens' nests are known as eyrie. I just think that's really nice. And another fact, the biggest fact of all, they're awesome. And that's a fact. So, wolf birds. So they've become known for many years as wolf birds, and that's through the association. The Native Americans would have first sort of associated with them with wolves. And the Native Americans would have even followed ravens because they knew they were going to be at a kill where there might be wolves or whatever. So ravens do a couple of things with wolves. Not only do they depend on them, there's a mutualism there. The ravens, if they find a kill or a moose that's dead or whatever, they can eat the eyes easy because they can access it, and the tongue often, but they can't get in through the flesh. If you think of how thick a moose or a deer's flesh is, they can't tear it even though they have powerful bills. So they depend on a bigger carnivore to do that. So they'll often call a wolf or a pack of wolves to the kill, and then they'll share it with them. The other thing, they can alert wolves to things that are nearly dead or dying, an easy kill, and they'll call them and they'll attract them to that, and then it's food for them. They do the same with coyotes and they do the same with polar bears. Now, there is a mutualism there. The wolves seem to have figured out that they're going to get as much food having the ravens around because they could dominate them at the kill. They don't need them, they could chase them around. It's probably too much energy, they might as well share the grub. So from wolf birds, they sort of became human birds because they would have learned when humans came and started hunting that these guys are going to be, there's going to be grub where these guys are as well. And they started to follow humans. And that's probably when cavemen and stuff and early man started to associate with crows and ravens and sort of gave them some sort of, I suppose, godly or all-knowing presence, that they knew where the food was, how to get it, and just probably observed that they were quite smart. So the crow and humans. A couple of things you have to consider how it sort of got to where we are now. There's mythology, the evolution of the species along the way to adapt to humans being in the landscape. So they've been here since now for millennia before we have, remember. A landscape altered by humans and change in opinions. So I'll touch on all of those things. So there's the significance of ravens in myth and legend and folklore and everything else. So first of all, humans in modern cultures would have come across them feasting on their dead in battlefields and stuff. That would have given them a very close association with sort of death, with the devil, with all that sort of stuff. And there would have been a bit of a thing there, whether they're to be trusted or not. Again, in witchcraft and all that sort of stuff, they've always been associated. There used to be an old Welsh belief, this is what the blind guy is, that they could cure, if you were kind to a raven, it could cure blindness. And that's probably because they eat a lot of eyeballs. It's the first thing you'd see them eating. So this stuff comes from all sorts of mad reasons. This picture up here in the top left it's a sculpture by an artist in British Columbia. And it depicts the Haidas' belief, which are Native American tribe, that the raven was the creator, the first god. And they're the first men coming out from whatever that is, the raven egg, I think. And so they would have had a big significance in ravens and would have been sort of trusted them as a godly figure. Noah himself released a raven from the ark. It's in the book of Genesis. There's a traditional belief that ravens will fly from a ship when they're close to land. When they can sense land, so you're within touching distance and they follow the direction of the raven. And Cain killed Abel, his brother, in the book of Genesis, but in chapter 5 of the Quran, where the same story is depicted, a raven showed Cain where to hide his brother's body. So there would have been a sinister connotation there. The Vikings have always, that's Odin, who was the god of war, and he had two ravens. Their name was Hugin, I believe, it's probably pronounced different, and Munin. And he was believed to sort of send them all around the world. He had one eye, he's always depicted with one eye, I don't know why. But they were seen as all seeing, his messengers, and they get the suss on everything before the Vikings would go into battle and everything else. Again, the Vikings and the Norsemen and all that stuff would use ravens on their ships to see if there was land nearby and everything else. And actually in the story, going back to Noah in the Bible, the raven never came back because he found a body or something to feast on in the land. So they were distrusted then in sort of Christianity afterwards. So within Irish mythology, the great warrior Cuchulainn, he was too proud to die, good sort of proud Irishman. He wouldn't die on his back. He was, after being defeated by the armies of Connacht and Maeve, he was in bad old shape, but he wanted to die standing, so he lashed himself to a rock. And for 3 days, the armies of Connacht and Maeve's armies would not approach him, in fear that he'd strike out on them. But this woman here, what's her name? Sorry? Morrigan, it is. Or Macha. She's known as different things in different cultures. Morrigan, who was the goddess of war, who could change into a crow, she landed on his shoulder and betrayed that he was dead, and then the armies came and seized him and tore him apart and everything else. So Cuchulainn and the raven and Irish mythology would have always been there. The Druids would have always respected the raven. as a sort of omen of good or bad fortune. And then the chieftains would have always looked to the raven as well for different messages. But the coming of this guy sort of done away with all that. When Christianity came to Ireland, all those false gods and strange things that we were worshipping at the time was all done away with, and we start believing in Christ and what we were told. So the ravens then in towns, in medieval towns, you have to remember there was no refrigeration, no sanitation, anything. So there was just waste everywhere. Animals were kept by butchers because you couldn't slaughter them till the last minute you're going to sell them. Offal was just dumped outside the butchers. There was an awful lot of waste in the streets. This bird's not a crow, it's a red kite. They would have been well known in all the big towns and cities in UK and Ireland to a point. We weren't as civilised, I suppose. But they would have scavenged on those, all that offal and all that sort of stuff. And since that has sort of disappeared, that culture's disappeared, and the red kite has returned to being a woodland bird. But the same with ravens, to the point where Europeans used to visit and comment about how the British were mad. They'd let these crows and ravens into the towns and to feed, but they were protected with quite big fines imposed if you ever harmed any crow within a British town, because they were seen to provide that service for them, cleaning up the place, rid of disease, all that sort of thing. To this day then, there's 6 ravens kept in the Tower of London because they're seen as an omen. And the crown will fall the day that there's no ravens at the Tower of London. So different things have existed with. Now, within Britain itself, we know that Henry VIII is responsible for starting to sort of change opinions against ravens and stuff. He was more into civilization, the finer things, wanted to clean up the place. So he actually put bounties on the ravens and on red kites and stuff, and parishes were sort of given targets to get rid of the birds out of their towns and their parishes. So that would have happened. And then Charles I reinterpreted that and sort of made that more structurally and put in law, and over time they just would have disappeared out of towns and everything else. There's always a great tradition of egging and rook pie and keeping rooks and jackdaws in Britain as well. Up until pretty recently, young boys in the UK would have stolen rooks and jackdaws from the nest. They would have imprinted on them and kept them as pets. And there's loads of mad stories. You meet any sort of older English gentleman, often you'll have a friend or their dad or they would have had a pet rook or jackdaw. And then farming came and everything else, and we started treating them as an agricultural pest, a bit of an annoyance, and we trapped them and killed them. Again, Tower London, that's Odin and Thor, 2 of the oldest ravens in London Tower. So whatever the significance in myth and legend, all of them, whether it was good or bad, they were all considered as powerful for right or for wrong. So we came along then. That's the Egyptians. We would have, once we got ahead of ourselves, we started to settle down into farm. We weren't as transient as we used to be as humans, and culture sort of dictated that we were going to settle in nice places and farm and survive that way. That would have suited the crows down to the ground, because they weren't woodland birds as such. They're birds of the open countryside. So the more open countryside, the more crops to prey on, they did well. And to this day, still modern culture has sort of just provided them food and different things, and they will easily adapt to everything we can throw at them. So again, we've nature reserves now to protect certain species. Choughs and ravens and jays are protected in this country. All birds are protected at their nest sites, so you can't touch a rook's nest without a licence, but they are considered vermin other times of year and people can shoot them. Egypt still poison ravens and stuff. They think they're killing sheep. They can't kill sheep. They've no killing parts. They're not raptors. They're not birds of prey. They've no big talons. Yes, they're big. Yes, you often see them on dead lambs that they come across and find. It's one of those things. And they're often kept as aviary birds or whatever, as falconers' birds, because of their intelligence. You can train them to do a lot of things. So, crow society, the very strict society and societal rules. The pair bond is often, nearly always monogamous. In rooks, it's always monogamous, so they won't separate unless one of them dies or can no longer breed. That's rooks up the top. The top right is the hooded crow. They're the same, monogamous. Choughs are monogamous. I meant to actually say about magpies. Magpies exhibit divorce. They will divorce. If they sort of fall out of favour with each other, they will divorce. And they call it divorce because they will go and select another partner nearly straight away. It's not just that the other has died or whatever. They will just abandon each other and just breed with someone else. There's another thing called extra pair paternity. It's exhibited in magpies and jackdaws. It's when the female will mate with another male, just to mix things up, almost to strengthen the DNA code of her chicks. But she'll go back to her monogamous mate, and he'll rear them as his own. It's a strange thing. We see it in magpies and jackdaws, but you don't see it in anything else. Jackdaws and rooks will associate with each other. Sometimes hooded crows at roosts, sometimes carrying crows and stuff, but choughs stay on their own predominantly. So if we focus a bit on rooks, the pairs form, they build a nest at the rookery. A rookery is where they nest, a roost is where they roost. Can be the same place, not always, I'll explain that in a while. And then in the spring, they'll build a nest, they'll mate, they'll lay the eggs, incubate. The male will feed the female will hatch the eggs, they'll both feed the young, stick together in a family group, and then in the autumn, they'll disperse into wider groups. So we're talking about rooks now primarily. So in the spring, flocks disperse in March and adults pair and return to rookeries to breed. The adults will stay together all winter anyway. And they'll roost together, and the male will roost beside the female on the branch. Jackdaws do the same. If you ever drive around, you see birds, rooks flying, you can almost pick out the pairs. In the summer, the family groups continue to forage until late July, early August, and that's when sort of approach autumn. And then in August, September, small family groups coalesce into flocks and return to the roosts. Then the flocks in winter grow larger in Ireland into winter months. Large rookeries form within both adult and younger birds. Juveniles may roost separately with jackdaws. So there's a huge social hierarchy at the roosts. And the young birds are subordinate to the adults, and it'd be strictly enforced. Now, within the flock and the communal behaviour, there's parishes within rooks. They're really cool. So the rookeries, there'll be, just say in Laois, just say in towns, each town, just say there's 20 rookeries around Portlaoise. There'll be one main roost. In the summer, when they're breeding at the rookeries, other birds may roost there and they'll roost at the rookeries. But in the winter, those rookeries will totally disperse. After feeding for the day, they'll come back to where they've bred in the winter to roost for a while, to whatever, chew the cud, and then they'll all go off to roost together at the big roost site. And the Downs rookery is one of those. So this is what they do during the day. So I just explained what they do. So they'll go off to their feeding areas in the winter, loads of them. So you'll see them in fields. You can see 300, 500, 1,000 in a field. They'll mix with jackdaws, they'll mix with starlings, they'll feed away. Then they'll go back to where they had nested, hang out there for a while, darkness will approach, and they'll all head for the main roost. And that's hopefully what we'll see this evening if you're coming down. So the communal behaviour at the roost itself, there is a vertical stratification. So the older, more dominant pairs are at the very top, and the younger ones, less dominant pairs and stuff, are at the bottom. And the reason is the heat goes up, the information filters up, because the young ones are out looking all day for grub. They're after finding some nice pile, and they're kind of chatting away to themselves. The other one's listening, and it's all going up all the time. And also, all the poo is going down. Yeah. So you have to think about that as well. Now, there is a switch. If it's really bad weather, the younger ones are forced to go on top, literally as a roof, to protect them from the rain. It's really weird. I've seen it, and it does happen. You see a shower of rain, they'll all dread, which is a term we use for when all birds leave together. Yeah. It happens in seabirds, and they'll just reconfigure, and they'll settle down again. Now, all this sort of social stuff doesn't just happen. Hopefully we'll see it this evening. A lot of people have commented on it recently. The field behind the Laois Shopping Centre is where it's one of their staging sites. It's an assembly point, and thousands of them will stop there. They'll have a chat, they'll sort of remind each other who's dominant, who's not, and sort of, let each other know what's going on. And then they'll swirl around for a while over the roost, they'll settle. Often a lot of birds that are running late will come, they'll all have to go up again, settle things again, and they'll roost. You'll see it, it's mad. So nesting and communal behaviour. So, like I said, the rookeries Could be anything. One nest in a tree is a rookery, if it's a rook or a jackdaw. There's a case, there's 12,000 nests in one in Scotland. That's really rare. The one in Portlaoise, the Downs that we're going to see, roughly between 4,000 and 6,000 birds roost there. There's about 200 nests each year. So they go off, they disperse into smaller rookeries. Don't know why, probably because they're closer to other feeding areas, that there's not as much competition. So yeah, so the male will roost beside the nest, feed the female during the day, and the youngsters will come out and then they'll just do what they have to do. So going into crow intelligence. Crows were often ignored, or birds were often ignored as intelligent. We always knew parrots were intelligent because they could talk, they could learn behaviours, they made good pets, everything else. The relative brain size of the crows and the raven is massive compared to most birds. That's a New Caledonian crow, probably the brainiest or the best known and best studied crow species. The brain, relative size to a domestic pigeon, a bird the very same size. It's about half the size, half the weight. The bird's brain, when it was first dissected, and it's sort of used as an insult as well, you're a bird brain or whatever. Now it's probably a compliment, because they're saying now that there's a new book out from Nathan Emery, and he's saying they're the feathered apes. They're intelligent as the grey apes, as dolphins, as humans, even as intelligent as a 7-year-old child. So depending on how intelligent your 7-year-old is. But they've really big brains. The structure of the bird brain differs from mammals, so we never really took it serious. They've no, what's the word I'm looking for? I'll come back to it. Doesn't matter. So it's different than mammals. The way it works is different. So they consider they couldn't really think and they weren't capable of higher thinking like humans. Sorry, it's the cerebral cortex. So birds don't have cerebral cortex. That's where we do all the thinking. All the information gets sorted and goes out. Rooks have a thing called a pertlin, and all birds do, and it's much smaller. So they think that crows and birds have to think much faster, and it's probably down to how you see their flock mentality. Like starlings, for instance, can move around in that, so they have to be really quick thinking. And so they reckon that they've evolved for that part of the brain to do exactly what the cerebral cortex does. So, like I said, they're as intelligent as the apes, dolphins, a 7-year-old, okay? They have a body to brain weight ratio to all those animals. So the big brain would suggest that they're capable of much higher thinking. So observe behaviours within the crows. They're adaptable, okay? So that shows some sort of sense that they can get on in any sort of situation. They play, like I described earlier. If they've time to play, that means if everything else sorted out, they're doing well. They cache food. Not only do they cache food, which is smart, they remember where it all is. The Clark's nutcracker, and we don't have it here, they're in North America. They can cache up to sort of 10, 15,000 nuts in a year and remember where each one of those are. They're capable of learning. I'll discuss some stuff on that in a minute. They obviously communicate. I've given you examples. And they can use tools, which when Jane Goodall figured that out in apes in the 60s, that was given so much sort of in scientific, like that was put right up there with the best discoveries of science. Now that they know crows do it, it's a big deal. But it's not a sort of breakthrough, I suppose. We're sort of expecting a little bit. So I'm going to show you some videos now to break up the sound of my voice, get a rest, to sort of depict some of these. So basically that video, you see there's loads of videos of it. That's a hooded crow in Russia, and it's using a lid off some sort of yogurt can or something to snowboard down a roof. And it just doesn't do it once, it does it about 20 times. And you see it in ravens, they do it on frozen car windows as well, they slide down the thing, so it's really mad. There's loads, you've got hours of YouTubing when you get home ahead of you.
Are you putting this presentation up online?
Jackie might put up online, I don't know if you do. Yeah. The other one is caching food, so it's not exactly a very thrilling video anyway, I can describe what's going on. They will just hide the food. So this guy's after taking off a big dog in the garden. The dog sort of finished his dinner. He's got the nut. He's looking for around, but he's watching his buddy to make sure his buddy hasn't seen where he's putting it. And he's sort of looking over his shoulder to see where his buddy is. And eventually he caches it when he's happy. He knows where it is. And not that, but he'll remember where it is and he'll go back and get it.
I've seen a video on YouTube of crows bringing a little girl gifts because she started to feed
Right, okay. No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, she's maybe 7 or 8, and she starts to come out in her garden and feed them, and then more starts to come, and then they start to bring her little bits.
That's amazing. So yeah, they're sort of rewarding her for
Yeah.
feeding her. So they've sort of trained her to feed them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's brilliant.
Actually, in Dunleary, there's a guy at the top of the pier in Dunleary. There's always birds around, But there's one guy that as soon as he rocks up on his bike, they just usually come from and they're sitting on his arm, they're on his shoulders, on his head, on his bike. He's trained to turn up every day to feed them, and they just come from nowhere.
Well, that feeds nicely into this slide. So crow intelligence and facial recognition. So they recognise that guy approaching on his bike. And there was a study, you can say that people will say, oh, the crows know when I'm coming out to feed the dog, and they'll rob the dog, and they'll do this and they'll do that, but it's never been scientifically proven. Until in the University of Washington in 2006, 10 years ago, they decided to see if they could make a trial to do that. So what they did was, they went around in 2 masks around the campus as normal. They went around in a Dick Cheney mask, which to me is a lot more sinister than the caveman mask. But they did both. And the crows on campus didn't show, North American crow didn't show any sort of, they just thought they were someone else. Got to understand, university campus, loads of people milling around, just another face in the crowd. So then they caught some crows, they caught 6 crows using the caveman mask and left the mask on when they were catching them. Put on a tag, a colour tag, so they know that these were birds that were caught, and let them go again. And then walk through campus again wearing the 2 masks. The birds didn't care about Dick Cheney, let him carry on as normal. But they aggressively pursued the caveman and complained about it. And the birds that were marked and were unmarked were doing it. So the birds that were marked had gone back and told him, this lad's dodgy, don't go near him. They were still mobbing him 2 years later in the caveman mask, and they had not tagged any other birds. So it survived that long, the information. But after 2 years, they did note a deterioration in the recognition of the crows. So crows in the wild probably wouldn't live that long anyway. There probably would have been a turnover and less birds to warn the others, I suppose. Now, to the point where that has evolved, the recognition or facial recognition of crows, that the US Army have sponsored a study to see if they can train crows to basically recognise their enemies. Now, not necessarily the Taliban or whatever, I'm just being slightly sort of... but they're funding loads of research into this sort of stuff, and it's just mad. But I mean, I can see the merit in it. Everything's sort of crazy until it's proven, but... This guy here, crow intelligence. So, intelligence in animals is measured in cognitive ability, and that's the ability to solve novel problems is normally. Intelligence is sort of, the definition is contested a bit. But basically you give them a problem and see if they can solve it. Something that they've never seen before, a novel problem. This crow here is a New Caledonian crow, the ones with the biggest brains and the ones that were seen in the wild using hooks to get grubs out of the bark. They can fashion their own hooks and everything to get the grubs. Actually, Shay, you probably want to think about getting your buddies. Nearly, yeah.
Sorry, just to say, they just told us that we need to be gone before the alarm will start to go.
What time is it?
25 to.
All right, we're out here in 10 minutes.
The alarm will go.
Grand. So this guy is using the heavy items to displace the water to make the floating food go up. He's ignoring the empty ones, the hollow ones, because he knows it won't displace the water. And he does it a few times. He's presented with 2 test tubes, one's full of sand, one's full of water. Can't get the food out of the one with the sand because it won't be displaced. And all this is the first time he's ever seen that. The New Caledonian crow has been well known to use tools and make tools. But recently, there's a good video now, they've discovered that the Hawaiian crow, the ala ala, it's extinct in the wild in Hawaii. There's 109 of them exist in captivity in San Diego Zoo. And a guy had a hunch that they could probably do it as well, because island crows have been closely associated with doing this. So he rang up San Diego Zoo and he says, by any chance have you ever recorded this going on? And they said, actually, yeah, there's been a few sort of visitors have recorded it and bits and bobs. So now they've got a study going on. They've measured the whole population, because there's only 109 of them, and they all can do it, which is just mad. So it's really good. So we're starting to wind up now. We're going to meet the ravens shortly, but the local crows, so the Downs study. The Downs rookery has been around within living memory. I never got really past that, but the trees are a lot older than that, so we don't know how long. They're on top of an esker, you'll see it. Talk a bit more of it over there. But I did a census the last 2 years, so on average, in 2005 there was 3,700-ish birds visiting there at night. There was 188 nests that year, and this year there's been over 4,000 birds visiting the site at night to roost, and just over 200 nests. So it fluctuates a bit. Sometimes they'll abandon a roost completely for a year or two. It's totally inexplicable. But it hasn't happened this year yet, so hopefully we'll see them. There's a sign gone up that we want to sort of unofficially unveil. It's Us Portlaoise, Us Whelan, and it's really nice. A lot of effort went into it, and hopefully it'll bring more people's attention. A lot of people pass through the park, use the park, but don't ever consider the crows at all. But it's definitely the best urban spectacle there is. This year, using the guys, the good ornithologists from the Birdwatch Ireland local branch, are going to try figure out the structure of the parish around Laois and see where the rookeries and the roosts exist. So I haven't told them yet, but I'm sure that they're always very helpful, so I'm looking forward to that. So I just want to thank Niall Kavanagh for getting this all started. Richard Duff for all the photos of all the Irish crows were from Richard. He's here in the crowd. Thanks, Richard. Jackie Gorman, Midlands Science Festival, for having us here. Suzanne and all the library staff. Shane and Elaine from Ravenhaven. You're going to see their babies now shortly, which is really good. We're getting to meet them. And Laois County Council, Catherine Casey, Maeve Flynn, Anne-Marie Kelly and Wes Wilkinson for just being so good along the way and supporting the signs and any studies we've done and all these things. So it's good. Suggested reading, Mark Cocker's a great book out, Crow Country. It's not just on birds, it's a bit of a biography as well. It's a nice story, it rolls nice with it. That Bird Brain book, an exploration of avian intelligence, Nathan Emery, is brand new, it's a good one. Talks all about recent breakthroughs. Brent Heinrich on ravens is class. Birds of Ireland, Facts and Folklore, it's a deadly book, really interesting. The Raven by Derek Ratcliffe, probably the most all-round book. It's really good if you're really, really interested in ravens. And that's it, thanks very much.
I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Lately I've seen single crows, I don't know what type, but flying birds of prey. And the birds of prey like eagles.
Oh yeah.
There's certain
Yeah, so they're mobbing them. So, thanks lads. So basically, once the bird of prey is scuppered, it's known, it's totally useless because it uses surprise to attack things. So once the crows mob it, they'll just get it out of their territories and away from where it can be harmful. That's all it is.
So even if it's only one?
Yeah, yeah. They don't like to risk it.
No, it's okay.
So you can take photos, I think. It's okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So who have we got here?
This is Feaker. He's an Irish male raven. He was bred in captivity by a friend of ours. Before anyone starts asking what nest we took him out, because we don't do that. But he's the male. He's only 3 and he's not fully grown. He won't be fully grown till he's about 5. He won't. Now he does carry on and he can bite and take no matter how. He bonded with me. I was in hospital last year for a week. Elaine was feeding him, but he still kept watching the back door for me coming out. Yeah.
He also, for anyone that doesn't know, is in actually the Vikings is made here in Ireland. He's not one of Odin's raven. His brother Satan is one of Odin's, but this is Satan's brother. That didn't come out right. Sorry. He has an older brother called Satan who is in the Vikings.
He's in it as well.
He's in it with Travis Fimmel. There's something I wanted to pick up on there that you said. I'm trying to remember now. See if something that you said. Yeah.
I get that wire out.
Sorry, thanks.
Now ravens, when they are nesting, they only nest within 3 kilometres of each other. They won't go any closer.
Sorry.
Can we have that? Simply because of the food source and things like that. Now they are curious and very intelligent. Normally what we have to do is go around the charity shops and buy kids' toys with buttons on it or something that makes noise. No. What?
Yeah.
See, we call it his beard. The feathers actually come down here. The female doesn't have that. The female is smooth.
And when the head fluffs up like that, that's usually when he's going to communicate with you, talk to you. They do speak in human voice. Satan has a few choice words we won't say in front of the children.
Satan used to say, hello, thank you, Elaine, and tell you to F off. Right, this fella here mainly does sounds. The guy next door to us breeds Jack Russell, and the yelp of the Jack Russell he does the European eagle owl, and things like that. But unfortunately, they don't do it on command.
Yeah.
Sure you don't. And normally you get people coming up and saying, "Where'd you get the jackdaw, mister?" And when they say that, he goes into his box and doesn't come out for the rest of the day. He's sold, don't you?
And the thing about recognising people, he knows exactly when Shay's not around and he doesn't be happy. So you are liable to be bitten when that's going on. But the thing about if we need to do something that's not nice, now I'm not talking about cruelty, I'm saying if maybe they need an injection or something, Shay goes in a different jacket. We kind of wear the same type of clothes when we're dealing with all the birds. We have a good lot of owls as well. But if you're going to do something, don't go in your normal gear. I mean, he'll probably go in something I'm wearing, so
she gets picked.
so I'll get picked, but they do.
But they do remember.
They do remember and they do recognise, yeah. And he doesn't forget, and they're always one step ahead of you.
Now, I can give him a whole rabbit carcass, and the main reason they go for the eye is to get in at the brain. They will eat the tongue and the eye, but we've had people telling us that we've seen them rolling the sheep onto their backs. And to be honest with you, that's bull's gutter, because it doesn't happen. How could a raven roll a sheep onto its back? But it's just another excuse for them to shoot them and hurt them, that's all.
Another interesting thing, Satan is our breeding raven. His wife is called Tolfa. But if you give them a frozen, we'll say someone gave us a chicken that died naturally, we have to know how they died. If it's frozen and you give it in, Satan will go over to his water thing.
Oh, which was bad.
And he'll put you're okay, he's tied, he can't get near you. He'll put the frozen chicken into the water, and if you watch him then, maybe a couple of hours later, he'll take it out and he'll flip it over. Now that's that's to defrost the chicken. So they're just amazing. Now I'm scared to show you this guy after what Ricky said.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he mentioned to you about the size of a jackdaw, okay? There's a little bit of a story with this. When I take him out, he's going to look like a blackbird. And I'll explain first because you're going to laugh. But it's okay. He's been in a film as well. He's in a horror movie down in Loftus Hall called The Lodgers. But it was very funny. The animal wrangler said, "Do you have a jackdaw?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "We've a sort of a jackdaw." Right. Yeah, so when he came to see him, he went, "Oh, he's dainty." Now, his name was Jason. We call him after the ranger that visits us. He's now known as Mr. Montague.
That's who he was in the film.
Oh, he's a star.
Yeah. Come on. I'm sorry, but he's not the normal size.
He should actually be the size of a normal jackdaw.
I'll explain to you what does happen. I'm aware that we have small children here, but what happens is when birds are not healthy in a nest, the parents will throw them out. You'll hear people ring us constantly, "This bird fell out." Birds don't fall out of a nest, they've been thrown from a nest. And the reason is that they're not healthy and they're going to die anyway. So they won't use their energy feeding something that's not going to survive. It sounds cruel, but it's nature. They will look after the healthy ones. So what happened was this little guy was thrown out of his nest, and some good-natured person picked it up and rang us and asked us, "Will we take him?" Now,
he was thrown out in a shopping centre car park.
Oh, in a car park.
And that's why they took him, because he was going to be run over.
Now, the point I'm making, if we hadn't to take him in and probably give him the specialised food that we gave him, he wouldn't have survived. And to be honest, we were trying to give him away to people and no one would take him. So
Then we got called for the film.
And then we got called and they took him and they were absolutely chuffed. The young boy that uses him in the thing was absolutely delighted with him. But if you look, if we didn't tell you it was a jackdaw, would anyone know it was a jackdaw? No. Yeah. And that's the reason the parents won't. I mean, he can't go back. He couldn't go back to the wild. I mean, where's he going to get a girlfriend? In here. Because the jackdaw has these lovely grey stripes kind of up here, if you see them. Now, he's come a long way. He's perfectly healthy. It's just when people say, you know,
Vertically challenged.
he's definitely. So if you were to scoop up all the ones that are, I mean, what do you do with them? We can't keep them feeding. Now, he has a place forever with us. There's no problem. He might get another movie. But he's beside the parrot at home, Ricky. No offense. And they've started talking to each other. The parrot is now talking in his voice, and he's now squawking, saying things like, Ricky says, hello, what's for dinner, good morning, all that sort of stuff, and you can kind of hear it coming out in his voice now. But if you do find a bird on the ground, particularly the corvid, any bird, particularly a corvid, the best way to know if it's healthy is open its beak. If it's a very, very pale colour inside, almost white, very, very pale pink, that bird is not going to survive. The reason we kept him was when we opened it, he was perfectly healthy in every way, just a little bit small. That's the perfect word, yeah. Yeah, he's actually quite funny. As you can see, there's no bother here. But I might have to paint the grey on him just.
I don't want to rush people, but we're going to have to vacate the library. But the plan is now, if you're not familiar where the Downs is, you don't have to come, but everyone's very welcome to see the Downs when on unveil the sign when it's still bright. So you just go down, say, Finton Lauder Avenue, down past the shopping centre on your right to the roundabout, to Timahoe Road, turn right, about 400 metres on your left. Is the town park. If you miss it and reach the next roundabout that heads off of B&Q, just come back on yourself. It's about 100 metres back on your right then. So we'll be in there and we'll meet there in the next sort of, I suppose, 20 minutes, half an hour when people sort of gather themselves. That's okay? All right? All right. Thanks very much, Bob. So welcome to Park na Pobble. Portlaoise People's Park. It's a lovely place. It's been recently sort of County Council have done a lot of work to make it sort of more friendly to biodiversity. And it's been since, you might notice on your way in if you came from the car park, it's been awarded a green flag. It's one of the first town parks in Ireland to get a green flag, which is great. And it's got meadow here, and it's got bat boxes, it's got bird boxes, it's got a woodland, a tree trail, it's got loads of stuff. It's got an outdoor classroom. It's got loads and loads of habitats, really nice mosaic of habitats, really good for all the native wildlife. But by far the best spectacle in Laois, probably, wildlife spectacle in Laois, and it's also in the main town, like the county town is amazing, is the Downs Rookery. Now this is nothing, this is just a percentage of, a fraction of what will be here. The guys you see behind you are the ones that probably nested here earlier in the year, and they gather first where they've nested. And it's sort of their home spot, their territory. You can hear the jackdaws, they sound slightly different down that end. And the different crow species will mix at the roost, but they'll be segregated in mostly. The odd time you'll have hooded crows attached somewhere, and the very occasion you'll get a raven or two joining them, but they'll all be slightly segregated. Later on, as it gets darker, what will probably happen is you'll start seeing crows drawn in from around, mostly from the Timahoe direction. And you'll see them gathering on the pylons and stuff. And with that they'll be settled at the assembly point in that big field behind the shopping centre. And that's, like I said during the talk, they're having a chat, sorting themselves out and everything else. But one of the things, part of this project, and part of one of Niall's ideas coming along, was to sort of to communicate the fact that this is here. Hundreds and thousands of people pass the Downs. It's an amazing sight really. It's a mature beech grove. There's Scots pine in there as well. A few years ago there used to be elm there as well, but they died with the Dutch elms and stuff, and they got removed. But still there's enough big mature trees for the crows to nest. It's on an esker, an intact section of esker as well, so that's got its own sort of interest points and everything else in geology, and it's quite interesting on its own right. So without further ado, I'm delighted that sort of a species or a group of species that are sort of forgotten and a bit revered and not respected have got to sort of their rightful place now in the park, and people can enjoy the sign and learn more about them and stuff. So I'm just going to let Niall reveal it because it was his baby as such. We just had to do a bit of research, but it's really nice, and Niall will tell you more about sort of his motivation and wanting all this sort of looked into.
Thanks, and firstly, thanks to Ricky. He's done a fantastic job. It was a brilliant presentation. Like, a huge amount of work went into it, and a really fantastic job, Ricky. But I grew up in the Burns Road, about 300 yards over there. And as a young lad, this was my playground, the Downs. And every day after school, myself and a few other friends and younger brothers would come over here, and we'd do, get up to all sorts of tricks. We'd have caterpillars with pellets. We'd be aiming up at the crows, trying to knock them off there, but we could never do it. They were too smart for us. And there was lots of rabbits and all sorts of birds and whatever. But we always played down there. And I suppose in the last 10 or 20 years, when the houses were built, it became a little less accessible. But one of the things that always fascinated me, and even in the last few years, as I was driving home from work, I'd see this big line of crows coming in. And I was thinking, I know where they're going, but I was often wondered, how are they organised, or who calls the shots, or how can you get so many crows in one place, and why do they come here? And so I said I'd talk to my ornithologist friend Ricky, and ask him would he have a look at it and study it and get an idea of how many live here and how the whole thing works, because it's often the things that are right on your doorstep you never even notice, and that's why I felt to have a community of, which turns out 4,000 or 5,000 crows right in the centre of 10,000-15,000 people, and they don't bother anyone really, and no one bothers them, and it's a strange phenomenon really, and so that's why I asked Ricky, and Ricky did all the work then, and then out of that came, we said if we did this interpretive panel, and part of it was we said I used the occasion to dedicate it to my own mother. She was a great woman to feed the birds. Now crows wouldn't have been high on her list of birds that she loved, but there was little robins and goldfinches and all sorts of little things that used to come at the back of the house. And so that's the dedication to herself, Geraldine Kavanagh, lived on the Worst Road. And so without further ado, we'll unveil it.
All right.
Thank you. And I think it's part of the council too, it's bilingual, it's Irish and...
Yeah, it's bilingual to fit in with the rules. It's obviously a public park and everything, so that was good. So we got it translated, and I can't tell if someone's translated into complete gibberish or if it makes sense. So, but I'm sort of told a professional did it. So a friend of ours in the Wildlife Trust, Brian Gain, our local guy, he did the design. I did the research, and I looked after the rest, if you know what I mean. And then the council facilitated going up. So it's dedicated to Niall's mum. Delighted that it's here, and it's here for everyone now for as long as it's here, and delighted, yeah. So yeah, thanks very much, Niall. So we have to wait till it gets a bit darker really. If anyone wants to, I'm not going to keep you here prisoner, but literally that is just a fraction. I see a few birds now starting to approach. As the light drops, it'll happen all quite quickly. So I'll certainly stay till the main event happens, and you're welcome to stay, and I'll sort of try to describe what's happening as it happens. But if you want to head off or you want to stick around, by all means, just...
or people have questions.
Or people have questions, yeah. If I can answer them, I will. So yeah, no, that's it. I think if we see a lot of birds approaching next while, we might head out to the car park and watch them at their assembly point, and before they all come over. It's quite interesting. And every so often you hear a load of birds alighting down that end towards the Strabley Road. That's the jackdaws. So they do sound different, you could tell them, but they do congregate together. So we call that dreading, when they all get up and reorganise themselves, sort of inexplicably just get up and go and fly around and wheel around. And then they just re-perch for a while, and then another group will arrive from another direction, and they'll do it again until they're happy that they're organised in a social, at the sort of structure they should be. And then they'll roost for that, and as the darkness approaches, they'll settle down and they'll get quieter and quieter. But they have staging points, so you see the birds in the distance there on the wires. Could be 500 birds on the wires all around us. and they're waiting and waiting until the light drops and then they'll come. But they've assembly points. There's a field just over the hedge there, and there could be a couple of thousand birds there too. So there's 2 species there. There's jackdaws and there's rooks. Rooks are the bigger lads. They're making up the majority of the numbers, but the jackdaws are in there as well. So they roost communally, basically to keep each other safe and warm and everything else. So you see them in close bundles there, and the younger birds are below the older birds, the more subordinate birds, and the heat is rising up. They're communicating where they found food and stuff, so all the older dominant birds are sort of grabbing all that information off the younger ones whilst being kept warm and whilst defecating on the birds below them. So the more dominant you are, the better life is for you, because you're at the top of the roost, you're the warmest, you've the most information, and you're not getting any crap on you basically. So that's what they're here for. And it would also make a predator have a second sort of think about attacking them in sort of the thousands of, there's probably close to 2,500 birds here at the minute.